well, wherever you find yourself in this time and place. Today, I'm going to do a short presentation on does psychoanalytic theory improve clinical outcomes for substance use disorder, a case study. Really excited about this subject and exploring it with you. So thanks for being here. You can read these intentions wherever I post this. I'll probably put these, but I'm going to just jump right in. And let's go to our case. We're going to call our gracious subject who volunteered their analytic work to us. We're going to thank them and jump into their case. And today we're going to call them Blake. And Blake is, when they came to see me, is experiencing intense urges to drink alcohol. They're seeking help because they notice a pattern when they stop drinking alcohol. There's this temporary resolve that dissolves into a kind of self-loathing, kind of negative, I hate myself type thoughts, emotions like dread, fear, and anxiety, leading to alcohol craving as a strategy as they kind of articulated to, one, feel better, two, kind of surrender, two, despair, meaning, what's the point of being sober anyways? Recently, when they came to see me, they were kicked out of an intensive outpatient program because they felt patronized by the programming. This I thought was interesting. They described their biggest problem is a tug of war between two impulses, a belief that they shouldn't drink because it will ruin their life. Also, on the other hand, a craving to drink that they describe as an uncomfortable burning sensation, like throughout the whole body, and they feel like the burning sensation is a signal to drink alcohol. It's experienced subjectively by them as a feeling to find some comfort and relaxation to escape the discomfort they're feeling. And how can we understand this split in the psyche, this ambivalence they have? And I think psychoanalysis can help us. And so let's look at it. Especially, I'm going to take one part of depth psychology, one part of psychoanalysis. It's an interesting field. It's got a lot of concepts that could be particularly interesting. But I'm going to focus on what Freud calls the economic problem, or they sometimes call the economic hypothesis. I thought maybe we could start with like a phenomenology or felt sense of craving. And based on some of the interviews I've done, it's essentially a felt desire to move from one state into another. And a sense if we know exactly what it is that will do that, in this case, alcohol. And I'm curious, my theoretical question is, how does the idea and image of, quote, I am uncomfortable, therefore I should get drunk to take away the discomfort, come to be? What is that process of a felt sense of discomfort to a plan? How does that work? And I think we can answer it theoretically. I think, something kind of undergirding the economic hypothesis this is how I would say it. This hypothesis, the body-mind is a homeostatic system, a biological homeostatic system that responds to felt imbalances via a process of translating response instincts into affects, thoughts, and then into thoughts, words, behavior patterns. Of course, it's not so neat and linear or anything like that. It's very, in the dynamic systems thinking world, they'll say like bidirectional. An affect can increase a instinct. Words and culture can, bidirectionally influence. When I say bidirectionally, I mean they both act on each other in feedback loops. And so it's not like, a neat diagram, linear diagram, but I think for our purposes, just to simplify a bit, thinking of it as kind of a progression of, a felt sense, maybe with something like proprioception even, that there's some kind of discomfort, and then translating that into some thoughts, and then maybe even behavior, craving and behaviors. That can be an interesting kind of toy model to experiment with. And going directly to psychoanalysis, looking at kind of a two-part model of the unconscious mind, a primary process where raw sensation is translated into affects, or this is an interesting one, pulsations of desire. And how I would describe this is, this kind of just going to our personal experiences. Emotions want to move or express themselves in some way, or they seem to. And the dynamism undergirding this, the movement of, anger wanting to translate itself from, like, I experience it in the stomach sometimes, or this kind of like tension wanting to kind of act out or yell, or I like to dance personally. That's how I sublimate, if you will, my anger. It wanting to move in in a way, or express, is like a pulsation, like a kind of a squeezing and a release. Is one way to think about it. And I think this. Okay, maybe we can talk about it like this again, phenomenologically. Understanding of what we might mean by something like catharsis in psychoanalysis. It feels right to process experiences or release an emotion. And I think this process, maybe this process of, raw sensation, and then some kind of felt sense of a release or a catharsis. This process, I think, is implicated in these clinical issues we're going to be exploring today. And yes, and so I think we'll stay with that for a second. Maybe I can just kind of cite my sources for a second. I'm talking about this kind of primary and secondary process, this economic hypothesis. You want to check out the neuropsychosis of defense, very early Freud, 1894. There's a tripartite model of this mechanism. An idea is loaded with such a level of affect, as I'm calling it, that it becomes dangerous to the psyche, so it's split off. And once it's been cut off or repressed, as we might know it now, the level of charge in the psyche must be dissipated by other means. If no stable formation can be found for that dissipation, it manifests itself, quote, lots of air quotes here, neurotically, etc. Okay, yeah, and I think that's useful to understand this energetic model. There's, through drinking or through reaching out to someone, if there's maybe a kind of attachment, difficult relationships, whatever issue you might be, and I'd invite you to, maybe if you're not working with alcohol and you're, for whatever reason, interested 7 minutes into this video, you're still interested, thinking about issues that maybe if there's an ambivalence in your psyche, looking at that and like what is maybe being cut off and what is, what difficult behavior you're ambivalent about, or situation you're ambivalent about that's loaded with affect. Maybe thinking into that for a second. What I'll say, something just very, very quickly, is just to kind of say it, what is the selection mechanism? What is cutting things off? That's a very speculative question. Freud calls this the dynamic hypothesis, or the dynamic problem. He'll end up coming up with like a superego, a sensor, as it's sometimes called. We're going to leave that for another presentation, because I'm more interested in the desire or the economic issue in this particular case. But just keep that in mind. I'm not just going to think that we can just say that there's some kind of agency regulating all this without some debate or questioning. Very interesting one. Maybe we can leave this here. I do want to say we can take this model and analyze it with Blake's case. The use of alcohol is charged with in some way economically with enough affective energy such that a willing ego lacks the requisite agency to change behaviors. And I would say my provocation is the bottom of the stack, felt sense of raw affect before representations, ideas, and words, is formal and productive, real and not speculative, and something that we can clinically work with to great effect, even with the dangers of kind of reifying such a thing and articulating it. Those critiques are I'm kind of sensing a rejoinder. However, I think it, just from clinical experience, it can be useful. I've got this nice diagram here of Freud's economic hypothesis, or one way to visualize it. Our primary process of translating affective energy into the world the ideal world of ideas, thoughts, words, etc., and affect that is too intense in some way, somehow being kind of dynamically selected and repressed. This is the diagram that's going to help us understand, or helps me, I should say, understand how this might work, or how we can test it or dialogue about it to kind of help our patients, help our people working with this these kind of craving issues. Thanks to Courtney Patchett for making this wonderful diagram for me. Yeah, and so for the last, I'm going to let this video go about 15 minutes. So I'll talk about the clinical design for about five more minutes. So here on part 3. So part 3, how much agency do we have when it comes to engineering or designing the secondary process to channel, sometimes known as sublimate, the primary affects pulsations into ideas and impulses that are healthier, more in alignment. I'm going to put air quotes around healthier, more in alignment with Blake's values. So here are some of the analytical tools I like to use. So first, we create a container where it feels safe, gentle, interesting, and right to allow emotional expression. This gives us the ability to expand the associative horizon of the preconscious representation system here, sometimes called the window of tolerance for some folks, but expanding this through relation. We land on a conditional interpretation that Blake is really looking for recognition and achievement in their life as a way to obtain emotional security. A combination of frustration when life doesn't add up to this idea. Blake is afraid of expressing this frustration because anger isn't celebrated, and a feeling of exhaustion from the need to achieve is with him. And so insight, we want to go from insight, get some insight first. What are the needs attached to alcohol use, emotion regulation due to fears of insecurity, i.e. threats to existing relationship. It's something that comes up in my work with Blake. And then also, what are the needs, emotions driving the abstinent beliefs, which is attachment to family, friends in recovery, and the culture of recovery, wanting that social network that is demand, or he is feeling a demand, or they are feeling a demand to for abstinence. From there, and there's a drive or a pulsation to have that attachment. And then there's also a drive for emotional regulation and security in that way. And that's where this ambivalence is coming from in their life. So how do I approach this, or how do we approach this? First of all, harm reduction. I have no issue with alcohol, frankly. When possible, we want to try to reduce harm when it comes to health, freedom, money, and important relationships. So if alcohol is severely impacting one of those, we want to proactively design ways to make that less risky. And sometimes abstinence is the way for that, the only way, but sometimes it isn't either. So these are my kind of big red flags: threat to life, threat to going to jail, threat to losing a job, threat to a primary relationship, parents, spouses, loved ones. If alcohol is really, or a substance is really damaging that, how can we reconcile those things? Also, proactive behavioral design. Creating short-term experiments to increase emotional security without the use of alcohol. Reality testing through dialoguing and journaling. Is the situation a threat to emotional security? Like, is the triggering thing that is leading to a use of alcohol actually really, really scary? Or is it something that is kind of being maybe inflated? The threat is being inflated. That can definitely happen, especially when past situations were really threatening that we are associating with the current situation. Sometimes that can be incredibly threatening, even though it might just be a boss saying, hey, you got to add a comma here. And that, depending on the context, could be a real threat, if you're going to lose your job or something. But, in this particular case, especially, they're doing great at work, or we don't see a future where, this comma is going to lead to a catastrophic job loss. So we can kind of reality test that. Okay. Creating an intention to cultivate more vulnerability and active listening when relating to others as a kind of strategy or an idea to create more meaningful relationships. Non-drinking relaxation, creating, they settled on a lavender bath with candles as opposed to drinking to wind down as a test, just as an experiment. Mindful drinking, when they do decide to drink, increasing the distance between stimuli and response. Learning to articulate the state before drinking and the state after drinking in more and more detail, contrasting the differences in sessions. Not just kind of waiting before drinking, tasting it, not being on an automatic thinking type thing. That's what I say here, avoiding automatic drinking. I also say boundaries. We had agreed to 3 drink max, so no binge. They had agreed to not binge drinking, which we defined as 3 drinks or less. And then our results: drug craving down after 60 days. So just on, a Likert scale, and self-compassion up again on 10 weeks. Subjective reports after 10 weeks, self-compassion up. And so we considered it a pretty successful short-term analysis, short-term counseling. And I am finding it very edifying to analyze from the perspective of Freud's and depth psychology in general's economic theory. Very curious to foster dialogue about this. Also, if you are interested in working with me on this type of issue, if you're still with me, shout out to you, 17 minutes. You have a great attention span. That means this material might be particularly useful for you. So consider this a nudge to sign up for a free session with me. If this is something you're, from a treatment perspective, working with, I'd love to work with you. We have, like I said, a free discovery session, and perhaps we can brainstorm some goals for you and path forward. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.